Hello, Caroline. We waited just for you.
Yeah.
So welcome everyone to this evening's Fireside Chat. Tonight we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, a reflection on all the contributions Hispanics have made in the past and will continue to make in the future. This year's theme is Esperanza, a celebration of Hispanic heritage and hope. The theme invites us to reflect on how great our tomorrow can be if we hold on to our resilience and hope. It's a reminder that we're stronger together. And I think those are two messages that we all need to hear right now, going through this crazy world that we are living in. Tonight, we are joined by two amazing women that will share their journey with us. Liz Johnson is the owner and principal care planning consultant for Always Best Care of Bergen and Passaic County. She has a business degree in marketing from Fordham University in New York and more than 20 years of healthcare and patient caregiver advocacy experience. She's a hands-on manager. Yesterday we had a dry run and she was jumping in between handling some patients. But she wants to make sure that people get the best care that they can in order to stay in their homes. So welcome, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Honored.
We're glad to have you here. And we also have Priscilla Alvarado, who has a bachelor's degree from Rutgers University and an MBA from Fairleigh Dickinson University. She has over 20 years of experience as an executive in franchising, travel, and technology industries at companies such as Senden, Avis, and Clear. In her current role, she is the Chief Operating Officer and Senior Consultant for Impact Consulting, which is a talent and organizational development consulting group, focusing primarily on diversity, equity, and inclusion. In addition to her career, Priscilla is on, she served on the board of Nishimba, New Jersey for 5 years, and currently serves on the board of Dress for Success, Northern New Jersey, and CASA of Essex County. So welcome, Priscilla.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy to have you here and on the board. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to start with Liz and ask if you can tell us a little bit more about yourself personally. You know, besides that bio stuff, what else you got for us?
Of course. Well, real quick, I am a native New Yorker and born and raised in the Bronx. My mom was from the Dominican Republic. She's deceased, and my dad from Jamaica. And what got me to New Jersey, I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. And there was a company, Letterly Laboratories, that was headquartered in Wayne. I was a field rep, hospital rep in New York City, and they wanted to groom me for management. So I had to, come to New Jersey. So I moved. I live in Bergen County in Hackensack, New Jersey. And I had an amazing career because that was the first pharmaceutical company. From there, I went to work with Pfizer, Hoffman & Roche, Wyeth, and then Novartis across, different categories. I traveled globally because both Hoffman & Roche and Novartis are Swiss companies with North American headquarters in New Jersey. So I had the opportunity to learn a lot because part of my journey, which I did not know that it was going to happen, and it came at a time where I had not a lot of knowledge. My mother, had Alzheimer's dementia. I was able, to detect the signs because at that time I was in charge of the psychiatry field force. So we were trained in a different kind of mental illnesses. Then my younger brother also came to New Jersey because I moved them from the Bronx, and I bought the apartment across the hall from me. I live in a high-rise apartment because I said, if anything happens to them, I don't want to be crossing the George Washington Bridge. So that being said, taking care of them, I retired from Novartis because they were both sick at the same time. My brother came down with colon cancer and he had limited time. So I had to get an aid from my mother from a home care agency so that I can spend time with my brother and sort of do a bucket list. So when my brother passed in 2013, that was the year that I opened up my home care agency. Because I thought, I want to get into a business that I understand and then I could be of service. And I bring everything to the table because many times when I have a loved one that calls for their parents or a relative or a power of attorney, they're in the same situation that I was in. So I'm able, to understand the emotion because it's very devastating to have a loved one that is, so ill that they need, services at home. So I feel that, I service the senior care community. I help with home care. If they're exploring an assisted living community, I help with that. And that was one of the main reasons that I bought this franchise, because it's always best care senior services. I follow the continuum of care for seniors, depending on what's wrong and what they need. So I troubleshoot with the family, what's the best solution for them. So as I say to people, all my knowledge, everything I know, like I bring it here, so I can service people and provide families with respite so that they can, do the things that they want to do, enjoy their families while we take care of their loved ones.
Right. Very admirable that you were able to turn your experience into something that's going to help a lot of families. Priscilla, same question. Share us a little bit more about you.
Sure. So that's an amazing story, Liz. I love hearing about your journey, honestly.
Thank you.
And I'll probably tell you a little bit why in a little while. But about me, so I'm a first generation Hispanic. My family is from Ecuador. I actually like to tell people, because it's true, I was made in Ecuador, but I was born here in New York City. Yeah, our story is very much like a lot of Hispanics. My parents worked multiple jobs because they were just trying to make ends meet. My dad worked at a butcher shop. I remember back in the day, at least that's what he told me. My mother worked as a data entry clerk, and they just did everything possible that they could just to do what they had to in order for us to get going in this country. So my primary caregiver was my grandmother. So I was raised by her pretty much. She was my best friend. She was my companion. She was my everything. My cousin's here too, Christine, so she knows, like, we were pretty much obsessed with her. We called her Mamita Querida, which the translation is Mommy Dearest, but it's all about love. For short, we called her Kida for short. But really a lot of myself, my personality was shaped by all the love that she gave us. That unconditional love is what gives you confidence in life. But at the same time, when you're an immigrant in this country, there, at least for some, there's a sense of not wanting to stand out too much either, right? Not wanting the spotlight on them. So it's a little bit of a contradiction, right? So you have a lot of confidence, but you don't really want to be in the spotlight. And that pretty much defines me, which is kind of odd. So that's me just sharing with everybody. With regards to being in New Jersey, I basically went from the Bronx for a couple of years to Queens to Union City, which was like the typical path. I see Michelle nodding her head. That's how our family kind of like came around New York and New Jersey. I ended up going to school at Rutgers. I just ended up being a Jersey girl the rest of my life. I've never left. I got my MBA at Fairleigh Dickinson University while I was working full-time at a company called Avis, which was a wonderful company that gave me a lot of wonderful opportunities. I didn't mean to stumble into the travel industry, but it was just something that happened to be. And I found my love of managing other people, my desire to like continue to move up. And the one thing that I didn't have growing up really was a lot of role modeling when it came to like the corporate environment. So I'll be the first one to admit that I struggled with some things. I struggled with understanding the politics and understanding like what people were saying. I learned the word colloquialism because I didn't know what people were saying a lot of times. So I had to figure out like, what are these things that they mean? And the men in my company just seemed to use it a lot. So it was really a struggle for me as I was trying to advance and trying to fit in. But fortunately for me, like along the path, I did find a couple of great people that really took an interest in me and my career and helped push me through. So I did have a wonderful 16 years at Avis, and then I went to another company called Clear that's also in the travel industry. I became a COVID casualty. So once the pandemic hit last year, my job was eliminated. I was one of the higher paid people in this particular company, and took them about 1 minute to to lay me off, which actually was a really good thing because I'll be the first one to admit that I wasn't really quite happy there, and gave me the time to do that COVID reset and really think about my life and think about how I was spending it, who I was spending it with, what I was doing. And I made a decision to really be deliberate about what I was going to do next, right? And one of the things that happened along the way was Dress for Success, right? Because I wanted to make sure that I rounded my life out better, that I went back to volunteering because I had missed that for years. I met these wonderful women, not just on the board, but then women like Cassandra and Mecca too. So this has been an amazing experience. And along the way, I also reconnected with a friend of mine that I went to business school with. We both had done our executive MBAs while we were working full time and traveling. Her name was Lucy Sorrentini, and she was the founder of this company called Impact Consulting that focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when we reconnected this year, I'm like, wow, what you do sounds so cool. And I don't know what it is, but I want to be a part of it. So she's like, well, come on, I've got plenty of work to do. So I literally took the role as a PM for her, just trying to learn the business. And it just so happened she needed me just as much as I wanted the opportunity to learn about the space. She needed someone with a lot of operational experience because her business is booming. And she needs someone who understands how to run like a team-based type of consulting firm. She wants to grow it by 5x. And so I'm there now. I'm her chief operating officer, working with some really brilliant people that I'm so impressed by, and doing exactly what I intended, being very deliberate, spending my time with really good people, spending my time volunteering. And then, yeah, oh, by the way, I got my real estate license. So that has been a lot of fun too.
In your free time.
In my free time, I know. My cousin knows it's like 7 days a week for me. So I'm going to have to pull back on something. But the good news is that I'm happy with everything that I'm doing. And that's what's important, right? So at this stage, that's my story. Here I am.
I think for both
Wonderful
of you,
story.
it sounds like you love what you do. You love the space that you're in, and you've created that as part of your journey. And like you said, being very intentional about where you put your energy and what's important to you and doing that. Do you think that came with age, or do you think that that's just who you are? Like, how does that happen? How do you become intentional like that, either of you?
I think it's a little bit of both, because, something that, Priscilla mentioned, we're raised, a certain way. Our parents, want the best for us, especially my parents, because they were also, immigrants in the United States. So they always focused on, education is very important. So I knew by the age of 5 that I was going to be going to college, because there were other members of my family, not in this country, but in the Dominican Republic and Jamaica, so that was something that was ingrained. But something that Priscilla said really resonated. So when I explained that what got me to New Jersey was a promotion, what actually happened, I was working as a hospital rep in New York City. And a particular day, my district manager, was working with me, Caucasian gentleman, so, we go visit, hospitals, and then we had to go home because he had to count my samples. So at the time, I lived, with my family, and my grandmother also lived with us. So actually my grandmother was the person, and I would pay her, to check my samples, do my expense report, the way you would have an admin. So, when he came into the home, and it was a tiny apartment in the Bronx, and I said, you want to look at my samples? Let me bring my grandmother. But then I had to translate because my grandmother really didn't, speak English well. So then, he said to me, have you considered, doing a job in management? What he first said, what do you want to do after this? Now, I was in my mid-20s at the time, and I said, you mean after today? And he goes, no, the future. Like, where do you see yourself? And I said, well, I never, really thought that far. Like, I like being a sales rep. And then he says, well, I think you would be, good as a manager. But because I've always worked as a field rep and not at a corporate office, he said, you would have to go into the home office, to get polished. Now, I didn't know what that meant. So that evening, when my mother said, how did it go with your boss? And I said, I don't know. Like, he said something about that I'm not classy, because that's the way I interpreted. And
Right.
she said, what did he say exactly? And then I couldn't remember the word polish, what stuck in my head. He thinks I'm not classy. So she said, go back and ask him and get clarification. And then when I asked him, he goes, you're very classy. What I meant was, you need corporate polish because you've never worked in a corporate environment. And there's a lot of politics. So I was brought in as a management development candidate, where I got to experience different roles within the organization and all of those politics that I was like, oh my God, I didn't know that you have to watch what you say, like you can't joke around. So all of those things. So what I learned, that feedback is a gift, because sometimes when a manager is giving you feedback, it's a good thing. When a manager does not give you any feedback, everything is okay. To me, that's not a manager that cares about you and your development. So I learned with that experience that you have to have some type of mentor or someone that's going to sponsor you in an organization, because then down the road, as I got older and I was in my 30s, I saw that the people that were getting the promotions, I want to say 20% had to do with your skills. 80% is who who is going to sanctify that Liz is ready for the next step. And that's something that is not taught, in the home. Somebody teaches you that. But if you don't have parents that were raised here, went to college here, and worked corporately, that's something that you don't know. So I had to learn, all those things. And then when I learned it, I helped other people. Because sometimes when you don't get a job, you think because they give you feedback, they have to be, well, you have to work on this, you have to work on that. But I got to a point where I didn't get a role that I actually asked, tell me the truth as to why I didn't get this role. And it was because the vice president was friends with somebody, and that's how it happened. It had nothing to do with me. And I just think it's a shame that people can't be more transparent. I know that there's some HR, issues that you can't really tell people, well, he got the job because he's my friend and we have dinner, every Friday night. But there has to be a way that, people would understand. So I had great mentors that were African-American and Hispanic, that they really said to me, these are the things that you have to focus on. These are the people that you have to get in front of so that they can see you. Because if you're not seen, they're not going to know who Liz Johnson is. So that was, to me, like a very teachable moment.
That's very good advice. And I think something that, all of us can relate to, because if you don't know what to ask and how to push, you're often left behind. Priscilla, what kind of challenges have you faced?
Well, it's kind of very similar to what Liz just mentioned. It's the fact that you don't know who to go. If you don't find a mentor internally that understands your path or where you're coming from, you're stuck. And I was stuck for a very long time, to be honest with you, because as much as I had people that were helping me along, I didn't have them helping me up to that executive level. That is a very different jump.
Right.
And so I didn't really know what to do. Again, my parents never were in that environment. I had no one to ask at home. I found that kinship and I found that mentorship through Nishimba, the organization that I joined many years ago. That was the first time in my life, and I was in like my mid 30s, I guess, at the time. I finally found my tribe, which was other Hispanics, mid 30s, MBA, parents, immigrants, right? Like we didn't know, we only had each other, and
Right.
we had each other to like start helping each other out with suggestions on how to handle different things, with getting different speakers, with getting the right books, like we literally were all in a pack and learning from each other. So it really shows the power of community, and that you don't necessarily find a mentor as an executive in a corporate environment. You could find a mentor in a book. Quite frankly, I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to books. I bought every self-help corporate book there was, like Lions Don't Need to Roar. I've told Cassandra this. I got all these books. I'm like, you want them? I got a whole bunch of
Got a library over here.
I really do. But like that was the only way that I could figure it out. And the more I actually would rise within the organization, get more promotions, then I finally heard about an executive coach. I didn't even know those existed, but I ended up paying for one myself, quite frankly, because I was really playing with some rough characters. I used to say that I wanted to like write a book called Bullies and Bitches in the Boardroom, because that's what it was. So, that's what it was. And the only way to navigate at that level was by having someone who was really by your side. And let me tell you something that was also, this is not really meant to be a knock on my former company, but I paid for my own executive coach. Meanwhile, I know that there was a big budget with HR, and there was a lot of people getting coaches paid for by the organization. And
Right.
I asked multiple times for a coach, and they said, well, you don't need one. You don't need one. And I'm like, well, why don't I need one? Because I haven't done anything terribly wrong. Like
Right. You have to
wrong.
mess up first.
You really gotta mess up and really be like on a path out, which didn't make any sense. Like, why would you make that kind of investment on someone who,
Right.
did something stupid, for lack of a better word? But
So
so I just
true.
went ahead and paid on my own. And that woman is still to this day one of my greatest friends. And I think I got a little bit more than I paid for, over the
Quick
Good.
question, just to clarify, what Nishimba stands for?
Oh, so Nishimba used to stand for the National Society of Hispanic MBAs. And they felt they weren't being inclusive enough, because it's true, it was not inclusive enough if you limit it to only MBAs.
Mhm.
So they are now rebranded as Pro-Hispanica. So it's a great organization. I actually am still good friends with many of the former board members. They've gone on to continue to volunteer there. And it's really an organization that's meant to help lift, same reason, lift and provide some sort of community to Hispanic professionals.
Excellent, excellent.
nice.
You touched on, finding your tribe. And I know a lot of companies have these employee resource groups and things that focus on, whatever group you belong to. And there's probably people that belong to multiple groups within their companies. What do you do? I guess Nishimba is probably one of those things. If your company doesn't have that, it's finding a tribe externally and outside of your network or your company or whatever. How did you, Liz, where did you get support from when you
So
moved?
it's interesting you say that, because at Novartis Pharmaceuticals, they had employee resource groups. So I was the president, of the Hispanic Leadership Network, because they wanted, to make sure that, several, different types of individuals, were together with their tribe. So what we would do is organize events where we would bring people in, powerful Hispanic people, and doing what we're doing, telling your story, sharing some nuggets. And with Novartis, I learned a lot also on diversity and inclusion, which is Willa's passion.
Right.
Because it's interesting. It all happened because of a lawsuit. Everything happens due to a
Somebody
lawsuit.
messed up again.
So there is an interesting lawsuit, which is Velez versus Novartis. So a district manager by the name of Velez went on maternity leave, and she was a district sales manager. Before she left, she had told, her manager, like, this is my succession plan so that when I come back, I can work on it. So what happened was she came back and they changed her role, so her and a group of women filed a class action lawsuit and they won. And part of the compensatory damages that Novartis had to pay was to educate people. So they started diversity and inclusion, among, different groups, Hispanic, LGBTQ, African Americans, so that people understand how should we speak to one another. So for example, if a colleague would say to me, I'm gay, my response should not be, I knew it. I was just waiting for you to tell me. It should be, thank you for sharing. So those things, like, believe it or not, and I'm talking, this happened, in the late, 90s, where people really did not talk about those things. And look at where we are right now, that the younger generation, they are all, for advocacy, supporting other people. And I'm happy about that, because I feel that it's going to be a new world, for future generations, but, for people like myself, for us older people, we went through some tough times. And it was good that in the company that I worked, they really, took an interest, because they didn't want to have another lawsuit. But, some things, sometimes, bad, out of something bad comes good things. And then they were able, to educate, the entire company, as well as globally, how do we speak to each other? How do we take an interest in someone that may be different than us? But at the end of the day, we're all people. Some of us eat pasta, some of us eat rice and beans with penne, some of us like chitlins, some of us like, curry, so all of those things, people got to learn, because Novartis was a global company, and they also didn't want an embarrassment when they would send, someone to another country, that they didn't look like an ignorant American, for lack of a better word.
Right, makes sense. Priscilla, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Or you good?
I'm good. No, I'm good.
Okay. So for either of you or both of you, how has being a Latina impacted your journey, either personally or professionally? Has it been helpful? Has it not really mattered? Has it been negative? I mean, what do you feel like as a Latina woman navigating this workforce?
I'll let Priscilla speak, because I spoke a lot before.
Yeah.
It's interesting, because I don't know necessarily. I think that there's some things that probably were questionable, and now in things that I think may have actually impacted my career path, but I never wanted to pin it on the fact that I was Hispanic necessarily. But there's definitely some things that, especially now in the work that I'm doing in DE&I specifically, and hearing more examples when I'm conducting focus groups with employees internally at other organizations. And some things resonate with me, like where they don't feel included, where they don't feel like they're being treated the same, And then I think to myself, I'm like, wow, I kind of had that experience as well. But I just don't know if I can say that impacted me because I was Hispanic, for one reason.
Right.
I
Okay.
do think that for me, what impacted me as a Hispanic is my family and the work ethic, what comes within our culture, right? And the fact that I I think you mentioned before, Liz, like education was so important. Like I knew there was no question. I had to act right. I had to go to school. I had to get good grades and I had to work as hard as possible. And that came from my upbringing. But I also think that that's pretty common across many different cultures as well. So,
Agreed.
yeah.
I agree with you because I feel that, I fall in two camps, because I'm Hispanic, and the way we used to say back in the day, and I'm Black.
Mhm.
So to me, that constitution of being different makes me valuable, because when I've worked corporately, they had to send someone to South America. Spanish is my first language, so that, is an attribute. The fact that I'm from the Bronx, I grew up, in Hunts Point, in the Soundview area. I am not afraid to go into any area. If I have to go to Patterson, if I have to go to Camden, because in my role as a field director, they would say, oh, you're going to be going to Harlem. You have to be careful. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I'm like, I'm friends with everybody. I'm like, hey, what's up? And
Right.
I don't have to. So I feel that who I am, God built me this way for a reason, so I use all the tools, in my arsenal, to help others to get, through my day. So, to being, Hispanic, and African American, I think it's a blessing for me, because I'm here, I'm there, whichever way, you skin the cat, I can go there. So that's the way, I view myself.
Right.
And
Sounds good.
if I can add one thing, I think that now, Kim, or at least later on in my career, the one way that it did impact me is that I did look at other Hispanics. I looked at younger people within the organization, and I did feel a pull to help them. Maybe because I didn't see those mentors for me as I was going through. I didn't see those Hispanic mentors. I didn't see female mentors necessarily. Certainly not the two, right?
Right.
So I felt an obligation and a responsibility to help them along. And I think that that's something that I would wish, we're talking about allyship. I think that's what I would wish anybody would do when you see somebody struggling or you see someone not being included.
Exactly. Excellent.
True.
So what does Hispanic Heritage Month mean to you? And I appreciate all of these months, but I mean, 12 months a year, you're Hispanic, you're celebrating your heritage, and we all should be doing the same thing for everybody. It's a month-long celebration, but what does that signify to you?
To me, it's great to reflect, Liz, if I may. Like, it's just great it is a celebration. I was trying to explain that to my husband last week because he all of a sudden was responsible for social media for his company. And they were trying to like do something for Hispanic Heritage Month. He's like, what is this about? My own husband of 13 years asking me that question. Like, is it time to celebrate? Is it time to celebrate the heritage? And for me, that's what it is. But again, I always like loop it back around to family and really reflecting back of like where we were, where we are, the contributions, but then also looking at it in a broader sense, meaning where are all Hispanics right now? Where's the representation? Where is it in politics? Where is it in corporate? Where is it everywhere? And I think that that's what I look at this month. I love seeing, like last week, a gentleman named George Herrera. He is from the Bronx also, Liz. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He is on the board of Wyndham for many years. I met him 10 years ago at a Hispanic Heritage celebration for Wyndham. And his story really resonated with me, right? It's the same story. It's the immigrant parents. It's being born in New York City, living in the Bronx, and making your way from nothing, just working, studying, working hard again, and then ending up in the boardroom of a Fortune 500 company, right? And now he serves on the boards of many other companies. So it's stories like that. And I saw him on CNBC a couple of weeks ago, and it made me so proud. I mean, I have no reason to be proud of this man, but it makes you proud to see the representation. So I think that's what it is for me. It's about representation.
No, I couldn't agree more, because Hispanic Heritage Month is the celebration of all Hispanic cultures, you know, Colombian, Dominican, Cuban. It's a time where, you know, we can all come together, you know, and celebrate, you know, because believe it or not, you know, between our cultures, you know, there's a little bit like, well, I'm Cuban and I'm this, but this is a moment that, you know, we all come together and we celebrate, you know, our heritage, and we learn about, you know, other cultures. You know, I have family that's Ecuadorian. You know, my family is very multicultural, multiracial. And, you know, there are things that, you know, we learn, you know, the different foods, the traditions. And, you know, there are parties that are happening where, you know, people, I mean, not big parties because we're still, you know, in COVID, but, you know, in little, you know, gatherings, you know, to have conversations with, you know, how was it like, you know, growing up for you? Because, you know, I have friends that, you know, they were born and raised in other countries and they came here, you know, as adults. And, you know, just to talk through like, you know, what was your experience, you know, coming at the age of 15, you know, not speaking the language and had to have to learn English and all of those things. So I look at it, it's a celebration of, you know, all of Hispanic cultures during the month of September 15th through October the 15th.
Right. I'm very fortunate because the community that I grew up in was predominantly not white. And I had all actually like all of my friends or something other than white. And so, and you know, it's funny because my husband, where he grew up, was very, very different. It was very white. And, you know, once we got together, of course, I had to introduce him to my crew. And it was so, for him, you know, he didn't understand that there are so many differences within the Hispanic culture. And like you had said, you know, I'm Cuban, I'm Colombian, I'm Ecuadorian, you know, it's if you're Puerto Rican versus Dominican, there's so many different divisions. And I knew all that intimately because that's how I grew up. I grew up eating, you know, more Spanish food, I think, than my own because I was always at my friend's house. And, you know, and seeing, like you were saying, the journey of people coming here, you know, at 15 years old, you know, making a transition, not, you know, that's your awkward time when you're a teenager and then you're going to another country and trying to figure out and navigate a culture that you don't know. You know, and so to celebrate the achievements of people, like I could see where you would feel proud just to see people rise and, you know, become at places that, you know, so it's kind of like, yeah, we did it, you know, and collectively we did it. And I think Just for Success is a little bit like that too, when we see a woman rise and we see a woman, you know, be celebrated and come to a level where you can say, wow, you know, and she's an inspiration. So you guys clearly are that to us. And as are you women joining us this evening. My next question, and before I turn it over to questions, is what do we do as an organization, as an extended tribe of one another? What do we do to be better allies, to be more inclusive of Latinas, to be more, I don't even want to say inclusive, more inviting, you know, to bring people in? What do we do as an organization, I guess? What would be your advice?
I think is to have more forums, you know, of this nature, you know, that we can, you know, speak to one another, you know, learn from one another. I think that that would be, you know, a good first step because, you know, something that occurred to me, when you're in the Northeast and you speak Spanish versus if you are in the South, you speak Spanish, they think you're Mexican. If you're in California, you speak Spanish, they think you're Mexican. And the beauty of living in the Northeast, I feel that there's so much more diversity, you know, that people understand that and they just don't try to pigeonhole. If you speak Spanish, you know, you have to be from Mexico because everybody's proud, you know, of their heritage. So I think more conversations, you know, about, you know, the different cultures, you know, the different countries, because unfortunately, I find that the educational system in the United States, you're not taught globally, whereas in foreign countries, so someone from the Dominican Republic, when they graduate from high school, they know every country, they know the capital, it's very global. And I find that in the United States, the curriculum is only, one thing. And fortunately, my mom, we had one of those globes, like with all the countries, and, she would try to teach me, like, yes, they taught you that there, so many continents, but let's look within, those countries. Because I'll give an example. I always tell people, I ask them, what continent is Guyana in? The majority of people tell me. What do you think the majority of people say when you say Guyana? What continent?
I say South
They think
America.
Africa.
Africa.
But it is in South America. But most people think Africa.
Oh,
Right.
yeah,
And it's just those
that's what they think, yeah.
things that people don't know, globally, where in other countries, like even Europe, like people speak English at a very small age. Children, they learn a second language. Whereas here, I don't know if it's changed, but when I went to school, you're taught a second language in high school. So those things, I think, it's important, to just, look at the big picture, where people are coming from, so that you can understand people and what their plight has been, before their ancestors, came to the United States of America. Does that make sense?
It does very much. As a student, my undergraduate was political science, and I will tell you, I've never felt so ignorant in my life as being in a classroom with students from all over the world. I knew nothing. And, here I was getting straight A's, like, it was nothing, it was easy until I met them. And I was like, oh my God, I know nothing. And so I agree with your assessment there. We don't teach globally. That is all I had for my questions this evening. I'm going to turn it over now to our wonderful audience to see if they had anything they wanted to ask or chime in. And just thank you guys so much for sharing. You're really both amazing women. And, as we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, you can be proud because you are that beacon for other ladies behind you. So
Thank you.
I'll turn it over now if anyone else has anything to add. Any questions?
I always
Yes.
talk to him, you know that. Oh no, Mecca, go.
No, you go ahead.
No, I just, my, many of you know, my husband's first generation Peruvian. And so we have a mixed family, and I don't speak Spanish. I'm horrible at it. I speak Chinese though, but but I guess the question I had, and I think Kim talked about it a little bit, we're about to launch a new strategy and expansion and really engaging a larger community. And what's top of mind for me are, we talk about potential Afghanistan's immigrants coming in, but, I'm looking at the other, and I think the Spanish community is sometimes overlooked. Because as Priscilla said, you blend a little bit, you speak both languages, but there's a real purpose, and I think there's a real opportunity for Dress for Success to engage that community in a really meaningful way. And I would love, and I don't know whether, and I have lots of Spanish speaking friends who would volunteer. I don't know whether it's language, I don't know whether it's cultural, I don't know, I think it's, I don't know, I'm being open and not very articulate, but I think there's a huge potential there within that community, and I'd love to crack it open more.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's about meeting them where they're at, right? I think that there's potential in a very tactical sense. There's partnerships that we could probably have with other organizations where they're already at, and
Yeah.
trying to pull them in, and it's more about an education process. I think we talked about this in the past. People
Yeah.
don't know still like what Dress for Success actually offers and all the
Yeah.
benefits and value, and we have to get that word out. We have to get the word out in that community. But and maybe the
Make
way,
them feel it's okay for them.
yeah,
And also, and then maybe offer if they aren't, English, 100% English comfortable, that we have Spanish speakers if they want to come and dress and whatnot.
exactly. We need to have that as
Yes.
well. Exactly.
No, I agree. Extending it, to other, groups, because Dress for Success, I really learned what it was, a few years ago when I got connected to Willa. All of the things that you do for women,
Yeah.
to get the skills that they need. Because in my mind, I just thought is, you're donating suits for women, that are going into the workforce. And when I went to a program at ADP, was where I learned, all the amazing things, that Dress for Success, does for women. So I think that, there's an untapped, market, with Hispanic women that they should be included in some of those programs.
I'm excited to say that we're launching a strategic plan a little later this year. And we're using an acronym that's called DRIVE. And the first letter of that, and probably most important, is the paying homage to the dress, that yes, you get suits there, but more importantly, the diversity. And under Caroline's leadership, and we've put some teeth into that, what diversity means for our organization. And I'm so proud of that, because we're building it into everything, from the training that we provide the women in how to handle diversity and cultural differences in the workforce and those kinds of things, training for our volunteers, letting our donors know that it's on the front burner, not the back burner, and that we're weaving it. This program is really wonderful because it has opened conversations, and we've tried to create a safe space to have open conversation. But the real work and the nuts and bolts of what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to Dress for Success, I think is going to be weaved throughout it, so that it's not a standalone, but it's part of our everyday operation of how we do everything. And I hope that that's communicated to the Latino community as we do more outreach, and all the other communities, because I want everybody to feel safe and have the safe space that we have here. And I'd like to have that in all of our programs, and, have people know us for that. So I thank you, Caroline, for being just such a great partner to work with this.
And I think to Liz and Priscilla's point, we're reviewing all of our agencies and how we're connecting to the communities. And I think we need to challenge ourselves to make sure that we're on all points, as you said, diversity, equity, inclusion, reaching agencies that are reaching multiple communities. Because I think that's the biggest penetration point where we can get it.
Right.
I agree.
I haven't been on the website most recently, but with this initiative, is there going to be a place where certain areas are in both languages? Or can it be?
We have a program now called Road to Success. So basically it's a mini version of Steps to Success, and it is done in Spanish. The thought was that there's certain cultural nuances and things that you just can't translate. I mean, you can Spanglish it all you want, but it just doesn't translate.
Yeah.
So our facilitator is she is Hispanic. She did one session and then COVID happened. And since the sessions all went virtual, We haven't had any in on video yet on Zoom. But I do think that we're going to start doing that. We have been promoting some other organizations' webinars that are done in Spanish for our women. But I think that it'd be good even if we had a couple a month that are, you know, translated, so that it's, because there's certain things like when you talk about emotional intelligence and,
Mhm.
you know, certain concepts that it doesn't translate neatly. So I think having it in the native tongue would be the better way to go.
Yes.
Mhm.
Any other questions for Liz or Priscilla?
I did have a question for Liz. When you went to school, grade and high school here or in the DR?
No. Here in the Bronx.
In the Bronx.
You know, so all my education, you know, was in New York City.
So that's very interesting because when you mentioned about not learning globally, like here, I grew up in Long Island, and I was very surprised when I came to New York or even New Jersey, where I now live, that geography was not taught. And yet geography and you know, the planets, I can't even think of it.
Astronomy.
Astronomy. I was going to
Yeah.
say astrology, but that's the
Yeah,
other.
Astronomy.
That's a whole other, yeah, astronomy.
Yeah.
We had to learn those, like we learned about that. And then of course, fortunately, Liz and I are like sisters from another planet, I think, because we both are Dominican and Jamaican, which is kind of unusual, but
Yes, it is.
yeah. So, you know, I learned about other global because of the family having so much diversity in that. But we learned in school about that. So it was very interesting how you know, you were in the Mecca in New York City, where it's a huge
Right.
melting pot. And I grew up where it was predominantly one or the other, and it
Right.
became that. And yet we had a whole other different experience learning.
So you know what I come to understand, because I have relatives that are teachers, you know, so a teacher selects the curriculum that they want to teach, you know, so there's so many things in history, and then they pick, you know, but if the one that's doing the picking, you know, is a Caucasian teacher, there, you know, well, I don't want to say the pickings are slim, but you're missing out on so many other things, you know, that should be taught. So, I mean, I went to parochial school, you know, so I was taught by, you know, nuns, and, you know, it was, and I don't want to say the education was bad, you know, but it could have been a little bit more, you know, extensive globally, just to know a little bit about, you know, other countries.
Right, right.
Just to know that Africa, for example, you know, Africa, there's so many countries in Africa, you know, but, you know, people think, you know, of Africa, you know, it's only, let's say, Ethiopia, Nigeria, but there's Morocco, there's Egypt. Like the other day, somebody said, I didn't know that Egypt was in Africa. And I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. You know, so those things, no, for real, you know, those things that sometimes like people, they're not making the connection unless they've traveled. So when I was a little girl, people did not know what was the Dominican Republic, because there were very few Dominicans at that time.
Right.
They didn't know where it was. I had to tell them, well, Puerto Rico's here, Cuba's here, you know, and then there's the island of Hispaniola, that's 2/3, it's DR, and another third is Haiti. Like people, a lot of people, they don't know those things. They know, oh yes, I've been to Punta Cana. I've been to, you know, Puerto Plata, but they, you know, really don't know, you know, the culture.
Right.
Right.
That it's more than that.
Yes.
I love the way you spoke about your family, you know, being both Dominican and Jamaican, and you know, and how you've got so many differences in your family, you know, throughout your extended family. And it's just, I love my one girlfriend, you know, we always laugh at all our weddings because we're like, you know, it was like the United Nations, you know, and we're all it just, but I love that. and, because you get
Yeah.
to experience it firsthand,
Yeah.
all the differences, and so you can celebrate it every day, which is great.
Mhm.
Thank you. Debbie, yes.
I have a quick question because I know we're almost at the top of the hour, but I've had a career in marketing communication, and I feel there's so much I don't know, even though I would frequently be given the assignment, send messaging to these parts of the world or these types of people. So, for example, I would know Hispanic or Latinx as demographics, but I don't feel that I understand like the culture and the people, and certainly the diversity within the Hispanic culture. So what book or what could I read to get to start getting some basic fundamental feeling for the Hispanic culture? Like, is there something that you could recommend? Because I want to know it above and beyond, it's like one of the fastest growing populations in the country. As a matter of fact, California will be 40% or whatever, and in the next 20 years. So what would you recommend that can help me get a better grasp on like the culture and
Well, for me, when I don't know about, a certain country, Google is my best friend. So I Google it because, it tells you, the population of people, the mix of people, like it really, goes deeply, into what's what, so those are things that I would do when I would travel, to a foreign country. I would go, to the library and get a book about that particular country so that I would understand the customs and the cultures. But Priscilla, I don't know, are there any books that you would recommend?
I have, because of my work experience, I do know the demographics and the geography and what's described in a Google, but I feel the need to have a more personal connection. Maybe your most famous or somebody that you've read that is, that does a good job of conveying their personal story or something like that.
Well,
Alvarado Library, what do you got?
I was actually going to suggest something more comical, quite frankly. There was a show on Broadway, and I think you can Google and find it on YouTube. It was John Leguizamo.
Yes.
It's literally called Latin History for Morons. Please don't take offense at the title. However, it's funny and you have to take it tongue in cheek, but it's a history lesson. I'm not
It
kidding.
is.
It was
Excellent.
pretty hilarious. I hope you don't take offense to it. It's a comical way of actually learning about Latin history. So it might just be something fun to watch.
The
Yeah.
other movie that's just out was In the Heights.
Yes.
Oh,
In the
yeah.
Heights.
The
Another one.
movie was a little long,
Yeah.
not
Yes,
great, but it definitely gives you a sense of that.
a flavor for it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
The only other thing I can recommend, because this is just how my mother actually, even though her parents were, her mother was Spanish, she actually learned the language and learned more about the culture. And as we did as children, was listen to the music. You may not understand it, but the music in different Latin cultures is different.
Yeah.
It really is different. I mean, between the merengue and salsa and bachata and all of those, but there are differences. And then the foods, like just the rice alone throughout all the Latin cultures is so different. I mean, we were fortunate, right, Liz? We had Jamaican
Yes.
rice and we had Dominican
Yes.
rice. It was
But
perfect.
the best rice, that's the
We had the best rice. And then wait,
rice.
my father was Puerto Rican, so we had 3 different guys.
Nice. So, and growing up where I did, we had a festival every other week was another country's festival. And so I just would go to all of those, and you see the different costumes. And, then of course I was inquisitive, like, why do they dress like that? Why are they, it looked like the colonial clothes, and, they're doing their dances, like, well, why? And so then you probe, and then there's a lot of great food there. The music, for me, I mean, I'm crazy, but like my radio station's on lock on Pitbull globalization. And so it keeps reminding me, because I used to be able to speak fluently. And then I moved to an area where there was like nobody to talk with. And I got out of practice. So for me, that's kind of like keeping it a little bit fresh so that I can, get back at it. But I think experiencing it, rather than reading, like you said, watching the movies, like getting that emotion. I think for me, that's probably the best. And that's
Yeah.
like what I would do with the kids too, is like expose them to it.
A festival is a great idea. Would we all get back together again?
Yes,
Okay, a multicultural festival, I think, would be a lot of fun.
it would be. Just for Success. So I'm going to tell Caroline about that. We'll put that on there when we get past all this crazy COVID.
Yeah.
So
So true.
anybody else have anything to add tonight?
Yes, if we have a couple more minutes. Can you hear me?
Yep, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay, excellent. Ladies, thank you very much. This was very refreshing. Thank you for being so candid. Liz, I really appreciate you just sharing all of your experiences. And I'm an immigrant as well.
Mhm.
My native language is English. I am from Trinidad and Tobago. And it was weird when I moved here and people's like, is that in Jamaica? Is that in Africa? Or I would meet African people and I would say, so where are you from? Which country are you from? It's like, oh, I'm from Africa. And I would say to them, Africa is a continent. Which country are you from? And they would get surprised. They'd be like, huh? Like,
Yes, yes,
which country are you from?
yes.
And or even more recently, like a lot of people now, the Dominican Republic, people know about the Dominican Republic, but they don't know there's a country in the Caribbean
Yes.
called Dominica.
Yes.
Like there's a difference.
There's a difference. Yes.
Google is your friend. But it's so interesting. It's so interesting that the experience is just so different. And hats off to you, ladies. I commend you.
Thank you, Mecca.
It is so uplifting to hear what you all have overcome, and you all are sitting here and sharing your stories with us.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Priscilla, you have been awesome. Thank you about talking about your career coach. And question for you, and I asked this question in the chat a little bit earlier, and Caroline gave me a good suggestion. Which books would you recommend? Which books helped you on your journey as a professional in corporate America? Because I know it's different. Because for me, my parents, corporate America, what? Corporate what? They don't know anything about that, right?
Right.
And I'm still here figuring it out.
Yeah, there's so many, honestly. The one that I read over and over during every career transition was The First 90 Days. Have you ever heard of that one? It's called The First 90 Days. And
Okay.
it's literally, I literally carried it around with me for years, because there was a time where I had like a new role every 18 months to 2 years. So I needed it over and over again to really like get off on the right start, on the right foot with any new position, any new endeavor. That one always stuck with me. And there was another one called Hardball for Women. That
Hardball.
for women. I'll give it to you, Cassandra. You know I'm trying to push my books. I will give you these books. So honestly,
Okay.
I've got so many of them. I've got to get them out of the house. I wish we had like a library. Really, I would like go get that.
We
Okay.
are collecting books
Okay.
at
you
Dress for
are?
Success.
Okay.
We have
Yes.
books and
And
we've
we
been
do
giving
have-
them out.
Yeah,
We're
we have a book nook.
you do?
Yes, for PWG, for the Professional Women's Group, we do have a book nook as well. So yes, Priscilla, if you want to donate, Dress for Success is the place, and we will
Okay.
make good use
Yes.
of those books.
Good.
for you.
No, definitely. They definitely were wonderful. Oh, I think
Okay,
Michelle just
Women Forward, the 2020 playbook. Okay,
Thank you,
Women Forward.
This was just given to me by an executive coach that I met. We were actually pitching for the same client, and so she said, hands off. But let's be friends and have coffee. So it was great. But it's a great book, and it also covers a little diversity in it. So I'm actually reading 3 at the same time. The one, I mean, this is an old one, but the Success Principles
Oh,
by
yeah.
Jack Canfield. I mean,
Good.
that's a great Bible. And then I just got this one too, which I just started, which is pretty cool. It's called Play Bigger: How Pirates, Dreamers, and Innovators Create and Dominate Markets. So
Nice.
That sounds good.
yeah,
A lot of good ones out there.
yeah, a lot of good ones.
You got all this, Mecca?
He's writing.
I am. I am. Liz, was there any book that stuck out for you?
So, I like to read a lot of philosophy books because when I worked corporately, I figured out that the way to make money is to go to roles that are male dominated because they paid more money. Like we all know that men are paid more than women, so traveling, is something that a lot of women are not able to do because they have a family, but I didn't have that, so in leadership training, there was one book that I highly recommend. It's called 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. And it's a great book, and it's a big book. Like you have to, read it a little bit at a time and digest it, but it's about from the test of time, how people think. For example, there's one that says, conceal your intentions, meaning you don't have to blurt out everything that you know, because sometimes staying quiet and listening, you learn more, about the other person, so it's a little bit, it's a dynamic because, we're still, in male dominated industries, right? So for me, in order to understand and get into that person's head, I like to read what they're reading, so I know how I'm going to, set my chess game up, so I like reading that. The 4 Agreements, is also a very good book. And again, these are all philosophy books that it's nutrition for the mind, because sometimes you think like, I'm crazy thinking these things. And then I read this and I'm like, I'm not so crazy because somebody wrote about this. Right. And I just think it's interesting because as of late, I read so much of it and it calms me down because I'm in a very emotional business, where people are yelling and screaming. And when I read this, it teaches you, it's not always about you. It's the other person that has an issue that they're trying to make you the problem, but you're not the problem. And I think that for me, those are very calming. I also love the book. I'm reading the one from Michelle Obama. I love reading that book because someone gave it to me for Christmas. And they also gave me a notebook that accompanies it that, you write about yourself. Sometimes you have to reflect on you, because we're all work in progress, and there are certain things, that I work on that I love writing. Like if I'm frustrated about something, instead of sending that email and putting it in draft, write it down, like write how you really feel. And then you revisit it in the morning and you're like, well, thank God I didn't send that email, that you feel differently. You don't have to say everything looks better in the morning, but I find like at night, instead of watching the news, because sometimes the news, I get very stressed out. Like I read, these books also, Baltasar Gracian, The Art of War, those type of books, because, these were, philosophers that things happened back, everything that's happening now happened back then, but it was just, internalized differently.
Very
Excellent.
good.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
ladies, so much.
Yeah.
Thank you,
you.
It's
ladies.
very interesting.
This was very nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
This is it for tonight.
Bye.
Thank you, Liz and Priscilla and everyone for joining us. This was fabulous. I think one of the best ones we've had yet. So
Thank you, thank
you're
you.
setting the bar a little high for me next month. I don't know.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, ladies. It
Thank
was
you.
a
Have a
pleasure
great
to
night.
see all of
Thank
you.
you. Good
Have a
night.
good
Bye-bye.
evening. Stay
You.
safe and be
You
well.
too.
Take
You
care.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.